The extinction form was only 2 pages long. That was the part Admiral Drova could never quite forget. 2 pages. A species that had crossed the stars, built warships that shook entire battle lines, and sent its people into the black on one-way missions without flinching, and the record of their ending fit on 2 pages. Filed, stamped, archived. Done. Drova had processed the form himself 27 years ago. He remembered the date. He remembered the silence in the chamber when the final confirmation came through from the Caldera Rift monitoring stations. No survivors detected. No distress signals. No debris fields with active life signs. The human war fleet, all 412 registered vessels had entered the rift and simply stopped existing. The Conclave had given it 3 standard months before making the declaration. Official. That felt respectful at the time. Now, sitting alone in the archive, stationed at the center of orbital ring Veth, surrounded by data columns that stretched floor to ceiling and hummed with the low sound of stored records. Drova was not sure 3 months had been respectful at all. He thought it might have just been efficient. He was old now. His scales had gone pale at the edges, the deep green of his youth faded to something closer to gray. He spent most of his time in the archive. That was fine. He liked the archive. It was quiet, and things in the archive stayed where you put them. He was reviewing a routine sweep of the outer relay network when the alert came up. It was small, just a blinking indicator on the lower left of his display. The kind of thing that would have been easy to miss if he had been doing anything else. He almost dismissed it without reading it. Then he saw the source tag. Relay Buoy 7 Thorn 9. Deep range. Outer network. Far edge of the Caldera sector. His fingers stopped moving. Buoy 7 Thorn 9 had gone dark 27 years ago. It was listed in the archive under inactive hardware, Caldera region, along with 41 other buoys that had either been destroyed in the battle or simply run out of power, with no one left to maintain them. It was not supposed to be active. It was not supposed to be transmitting anything. It was supposed to be a dead piece of metal floating in empty space, which was exactly what it had been for 27 years. Drova read the alert 3 times. Then he locked his console, sealed the archive room, and opened a direct line to Counselor Rail. Rail answered quickly, which was unusual for that hour. She was tall even by Orvani standards, her 4 upper limbs folded neatly at rest, her compound eyes catching the light of her own office displays. She looked at Drova's face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. "Buoy 7 Thorn 9 just reactivated," Drova said. "It is transmitting a compressed data burst. Continuous signal. It started 4 minutes ago and it has not stopped." Rail went still. "That buoy is in the Caldera sector." "Yes." "That is a human network buoy." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Drova watched her work through it the same way he had, the same disbelief, the same careful rechecking of what she knew against what she was hearing. The buoy should be dead. The sector it monitored should be empty. There had been nothing out there for 27 years. "What is the signal type?" she asked. Drova looked at his display. Military encoding. Human format. Compression. Ratio consistent with a large data package logs, possibly. Sensor records. The outer layer is a standard Hail protocol. You have not opened the Hail. I was waiting for you. Rail stood up from her chair. "I am coming to you. Do not open anything. Do not log this in the general archive system. Do not tell anyone." She cut the channel. Drova sat in the locked archive room and listened to the hum of the data columns and did not touch his console. He looked at the blinking indicator. It kept blinking. Patient. Steady. Like something that had been waiting for someone to notice it and was not in any particular hurry now that someone had. Rail arrived in 11 minutes. She came alone, which told Drova she was taking this seriously. She stood beside his console and looked at the alert. And then she looked at the signal strength readout, and then she looked at Drova. "Full strength signal," she said. "Not degraded." "No. That buoy has been without maintenance for 27 years. "Yes." "Someone maintained it," she said. Drova had not said that out loud yet. but he had been thinking it since the first minute. Someone had kept that buoy running, or someone had repaired it, or someone had replaced it entirely and simply kept the same identifier. Any of those options required the same thing: someone in the Caldera sector with the ability and the reason to maintain human military hardware. There were no registered human vessels in the Caldera sector. There were no registered human vessels anywhere. The species was extinct. It said so in the archive. 2 pages, filed and stamped and done. Rail reached past him and opened the hail layer of the transmission. The decryption took 40 seconds. The text resolved line by line, slowly at first, then all at once. They both read it. Neither of them spoke. The message was not long. It did not need to be. It was written in the flat, plain style of military communications: no extra words, no ceremony, no explanation beyond what was required. It stated its facts and stopped. Drover read it a second time, more slowly. Then a third time, because the third time was when his mind stopped trying to find an error and started accepting what the words actually said. Rail's voice, when she finally used it, was very quiet. 14 days, she said. Yes, said Drova. The indicator on his console kept blinking. The signal kept coming. Steady and patient and completely unbothered by the fact that it had just rearranged everything the conclave thought it knew. On the screen between them, the first line of the decrypted message sat in plain text, waiting to be dealt with. It read, Human Expeditionary Force, Fleet 7. We are inbound. Estimated arrival: 14 standard days. Please clear docking lane 9. The refugee processing center on Dreva 6 smelled like recycled air and old metal and the specific kind of tiredness that builds up in a place where people have been waiting too long with no good reason to stop. Yeva had worked there for 9 years. She knew every smell, every sound, every flicker of the overhead lights that the maintenance crew never quite got around to fixing. She knew the faces of the people who came through her data terminal. Each day humans, mostly, filing residency renewals and work permits and appeals that rarely went anywhere. She processed them quickly and without comment because that was what the job required, and she had learned a long time ago that doing the job well was the only form of dignity available to her in that place. She was halfway through a stack of residency files when the summons came. It did not come from her direct supervisor. It came from 3 levels above. Her direct supervisor, which had never happened before. It was a formal conclave communication, seal and all, requesting her immediate transfer to the diplomatic cruiser ISV Patience on the basis of her decryption clearance. She had that clearance because she had been good at her job and someone had noticed, but no one had ever actually used it for anything. She reported to the docking bay with a small bag and a great deal of uncertainty. On board ISV Patience, Counselor Rail met her personally, which was the second unusual thing to happen that day. Rail was tall and precise and looked at Yeva with the careful attention of someone who needed something specific and was checking whether she had found the right person to provide it. You hold human military decryption credentials, Rail said. It was not a question. Yes, Yeva said. We have a transmission. It is compressed and partially encoded under a human military format that our systems can read the outer layers of but cannot fully unpack. We need the inner encryption addressed. What kind of transmission? Rail told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. A buoy in the Caldera sector. A signal where there should be none. A hail from something that should not exist. Yeva sat down without being invited to. Her legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of her. She was given a console and the raw signal file and left to work. Around her, the cruiser's crew moved quietly. Nobody explained anything further. She did not ask. She looked at the signal and began taking it apart, layer by layer, the way she had been trained during a 2-week certification course 6 years ago that she had assumed she would never use. The inner encryption gave way in stages. As it opened up, what came out was not a single message, but an enormous compressed file: structured logs, sensor records, personnel manifests, engineering reports. Decades of records packed into a single transmission with the careful efficiency of people who knew they would have only one chance to send it. And then the archive footage. It was buried deep in the file, attached to the mission log as a supporting record. Yev almost skipped past it. Then she saw the date stamp and the vessel name, and she stopped. GNS Ardent. Caldera Rift Approach. 27 years ago. She opened it. The footage was bridge camera recordings from the final hours before the rift crossing. The quality was exactly what you would expect from 27-year-old military hardware, functional, clear enough, not made for comfort. It showed the bridge of a human warship in the last minutes before it did something that every piece of known science said would kill everyone on board. The commanding officer stood near the navigation console. He was not young, maybe 50 at the time of the recording, with a face that had the particular quality of someone who had already made their decision and was now just waiting for events to catch up. He wore his rank simply. He did not pace. He did not give a long speech. He turned to his crew and said, we go through, and we find what's on the other side, and we come back when we are ready. Not before. That was all. Then the recording showed the rift on the view screen, a tear in the visible universe, light bending wrong around its edges, space doing things that space was not supposed to do, and the ship went in. Yeva sat with that footage for a long moment. Then she went back to the data file and found the personnel manifest from the initial crossing. She counted the ships. 412, matching the conclave zone records. She counted the crew estimates. Roughly 190,000 people. Then she found the current manifest, the one attached to the incoming transmission, dated 14 days ago. She counted the ships listed under active commission. 891. She read it again. Then she used the console's verification tool to confirm. The number was not a formatting error or a data corruption issue. It confirmed 891 vessels, inbound, 14 days out. They had gone in with 412 ships, and they were coming back with 891. Yeva set down the notation stylus she had been using and looked at the wall of the cruiser for a while. Outside, through the hull, was the same dark that had swallowed the human fleet 27 years ago. The same dark that everyone had agreed was a grave. It was not a grave. It was a shipyard. She thought about the people in the processing center on Driva 6. 9 years of residency renewals and work permits and appeals. Children who had been born in those domes, who had never seen Earth, who did not know what it looked like, except from images. People who had been told, quietly and through official channels and in the polite language of bureaucratic management, that they were a remnant, that they were the end of something. She looked at the number on the screen. 891. She was still looking at it when Commander Brix came to check on her progress. Brix was dressed large, armored plates along his shoulders, the bearing of someone who had commanded his own warships before taking the desk job. He looked at her console, and she watched his expression do something complicated. How accurate is that count? He asked. Verified, she said. He did not say anything else. He left the room. She heard him in the corridor, speaking quickly into his communicator, his voice low and tight in the way that people's voices got when they were trying to stay calm about something that was making it very difficult to stay calm. Yeva turned back to her console. There was still more of the file to unpack. She went back to work. Her hands were steady. She was good at her job, and right now her job was the most important thing she had ever been asked to do, and she was not going to waste it. Somewhere in the outer dark, 891 ships were moving toward them at speed. 27 years ago, the galaxy had looked at the humans and decided they were finished. The humans had apparently disagreed. The leak happened on day 3. Nobody claimed responsibility. Nobody needed to. Information that large, moving through that many consoles on that many ships and stations, was never going to stay contained for long. By the time the Conclave's emergency session convened on orbital ring Veth, the refugee zones already knew. Not the details, not the ship count, not the mission logs, not the specifics of what had been recovered from the transmission, but the shape of it, the outline, the thing that mattered most. The fleet was coming back. In the Habitat Dome on Driva 6, a woman named Sola heard it from her neighbor, who had heard it from someone who worked the communications relay, who had overheard something they were not supposed to overhear. Solo was 44 years old and had lived in the dome since she was 17. She had no memory of Earth that was not secondhand her parents' descriptions, photographs on a tablet, a smell she had been told was called grass that she had never personally encountered. She told her daughter. Her daughter was 19 and had grown up thinking of the Conclave residency card as a permanent condition of existence. They did not celebrate. They did not know yet if there was anything to celebrate. They went and stood near the dome's wide observation window because that was where people were going. Not in a crowd, not exactly. People just moved toward the window on their own, separately, without organizing it, until there were 40 or 50 humans standing in the long, curved corridor looking out at the stars, not talking much, just being there together in the dark. Inside the Conclave emergency chamber on orbital ring Veth, things were considerably louder. The session had been called without the usual 3-day notice period, which was itself a statement. 14 species were represented, some in person, some by relay projection. High speaker on presided old, even by Orvani standards. His forelimbs slow with age, his voice still carrying the particular weight of someone who had been the most senior authority in the room for so long that the room had shaped itself around him. The first 2 hours were chaos in formal clothing. 3 species immediately began disputing the transmission's authenticity. Commander Brix led that argument with the energy of someone who had a strong personal reason for wanting to be right. The Dreth had been the ones fighting the human fleet at the Caldera Rift. They had filed the battle report that formed the backbone of the extinction record. If the humans were not extinct, then certain things about that battle report required revisiting, and Brix had no interest in revisiting them. A forged signal, Brix said. A provocation. Possibly a trap laid by a third party using recovered human hardware. We should not respond. We should certainly not begin tearing up the extinction registry on the basis of a signal from a buoy that has been unmonitored for 27 years. Counselor Rail listened to this patiently for about 40 minutes, then asked one question. The signal contains 27 years of continuous mission logs with verified timestamp chains, cross-reference sensor data, and personnel biometric records, matching individuals who were alive at the time of the rift crossing. Tell me, which third party has the resources to fabricate 27 years of internally consistent human military records, and why they would bother? Brix did not have a good answer for that. The second argument, which broke out while the first was still running, was about territory. 2 smaller species, the Vaughn and the Cerati, had received territorial allocations from the Conclave in the years following humanity's extinction declaration. Those allocations had come from zones previously under human sovereignty. If the extinction record was corrected, those allocations were legally questionable. The Vaughn representative made this point with great feeling. The Cerati representative pointed out that they had built infrastructure on those zones in good faith. High speaker on let both arguments run until they exhausted themselves. Then, he asked for a 10-minute recess. During the recess, Rail found Yeva in the side corridor outside the chamber. Yeva had been brought to orbital ring Veth 2 days earlier, still technically functioning as a data analyst, but now occupying a strange middle space where everyone on the station seemed to know she existed without knowing quite what to do with her. She was the only human in the building. That fact had not been stated aloud by anyone, but it was present in every room she walked into. The session is going to extend into tomorrow, Rail told her. Possibly the day after. I want you to be available when the time comes. Available for what? Yeva asked. The fleet has requested communication. Not with me. With a civilian human representative. Rail paused. You are, at the moment, the only civilian human within reliable contact range of this station. I am a data analyst. You are a human being, which is what they asked for. Yeva thought about pointing out that those were not the same qualification. Then she thought about the observation window on Dreva 6 and the people standing in front of it looking at the stars, and she did not point it out. All right, she said. Back in the data room she had been assigned, she found Dorian waiting. He was in his early 30s, hair still short from the conclave work zone requirement. with the particular look of someone who had spent most of his life trying not to be noticed. He worked in the same data office she did, 2 desks over. She had known him for 3 years without knowing much about him. "I heard you pulled archive footage," he said. "From GNS Ardent." "Yes." "Can I see it?" She looked at him for a moment. "Why?" He was quiet for a second. "The commanding officer. I think I know who he is." She opened the file and played the relevant section. The bridge recording. The older man with the quiet face giving the order to enter the rift. Doran watched it without moving. The recording was 40 seconds long. He watched it twice. When it finished the second time, he looked at the name tag on the officer's uniform in the still frame, Captain Soren Hale, and something in his expression settled into a kind of stillness that was not exactly peace and not exactly grief, but something that lived in the narrow space between them. "That is my grandfather," he said. Yeva did not know what to say to that. She did not say anything. She let him sit with it. After a while, he looked up at her. "Is he on the incoming manifest?" She had checked. She had checked that specific name the moment she finished unpacking the personnel records. On an instinct, she had not fully understood at the time. "Yes," she said. "He is listed as Admiral. He commands the fleet." Doran looked at the frozen image on the screen for a long moment. A man in his 50s, calm as stone, sending his ship into the mouth of an impassable Terran space. Coming back, decades later, with twice the ships he had left with. "He always said he would come back," Doran said, almost to himself. "My mother told me." She said he told her before he deployed. She was 8. He told her he would come back when the job was done. Outside the window of the data room, orbital ring Veth rotated slowly through the dark. 11 days remained. Somewhere at the edge of the Caldera sector, 891 human ships were moving through space at speed, closing the distance that 27 years had put between them. The conclave's emergency session reconvened. The arguments continued. The votes were still being counted. None of it would matter very much, in the end. The fleet was coming regardless. That was, Yeva thought, a very human way to conduct a return. The relay link request came from the fleet on day 6. It was politely worded, which made several members of the conclave's crisis team more nervous than they admitted. They had been preparing for demands. Ultimatums, the kind of aggressive communication that a returning war fleet might reasonably produce after 27 years of exile. Instead, they received a short, formally structured request for a visual relay connection. At the receiving party's convenience, signed by Admiral Soren Hale, Human Expeditionary Force. At the receiving party's convenience, as if they were scheduling a routine trade meeting. The conclave debated the request for 6 hours. Brix argued against it. 3 other representatives argued that refusing would be a worse look than accepting. High Speaker On ended the debate by approving the connection, without calling a formal vote, which was within his authority and which he almost never used. The message that sent was not subtle. Commander Tail was assigned as the conclave's on-site observer. He was young. For his rank Vethani, green-scaled, precise in the way that junior officers tend to be when they are aware that senior officers are watching. His assignment was to observe, document, and report. He was told this would be a formality. He stood in the relay room when the connection opened and understood within approximately 4 minutes that it was not going to be a formality. The feed came through clearly high-quality, stable signal, no interference. The first thing Tail saw was the bridge of GNS Ardent. Not a bridge from 27 years ago. Not the bridge from the archive footage. A bridge that had been rebuilt, expanded, refitted. The original bones of the ship were still visible if you knew what you were looking for: the basic frame, the structural lines, but everything attached to those bones was new. And behind the bridge, through the wide reinforced viewport, Tail could see the fleet. He had read the number in Yeva's report. 891 ships. He had understood it as a number. Seeing it was a different experience. They were not packed together the way a fleet under pressure would be. They were spread in clean formation, each ship with space around it, moving with the unhurried precision of a force that had nothing to prove and nowhere to be, except exactly where it was going. They were not identical. That was the first thing that registered. A standard fleet, built at the same time from the same plans, had a uniformity to it. These ships had the look of things built across many years by people working with what they had and improving as they went. The older ships, the original, for 100 or so, were heavier and blunter. The newer ones were longer, with drive architecture along the hull that Tale did not recognize, angular, and deliberate in a way that suggested it had been designed by people who had learned from scratch what worked and what did not. Admiral Hale appeared on screen. Tale had seen the archive footage. The man on screen was the same person, clearly the same face, the same quality of stillness, but aged. 60. Something now, hair gone to gray, the kind of lines on a face that come from decades of decisions that could not be undone. He wore a working uniform, not dress clothes. He sat rather than stood. He looked at Tale with the polite, focused attention of someone at a business meeting. "Thank you for accepting the connection," Hale said. "I understand this is being observed by the conclave. I will be straightforward so as not to waste anyone's time." Tale had prepared a list of formal questions. He did not get to use it. Hale spoke for 12 minutes. He described, in plain and orderly language, what had happened on the other side of the rift. The crossing had been hard. 29 ships lost in the transit, crew losses that Hale listed without embellishment. The survivors had come through into unmapped space. No conclave charts covered it. No species had registered claims there. There was material asteroid fields, a small uninhabited system, raw or in quantities, that Hale described as significant without being more specific. They had built. That was the core of it. 160,000. Survivors, the original crossing count minus casualties in empty space. With 400 ships and a very clear understanding that sitting still was not an option. Hale did not describe this as heroic. He described it the way you would describe building a house. You needed shelter, you had material. You built. The shipyards came first, then the production lines, then the schools, because children were being born and children needed education. Then the second generation of ships, which were better than the first generation because they had had the time and the resources to learn from the first generation's problems. Then the third generation, which were better again. "We had 27 years, Hale said. "We used them." Tale asked the question that had been sitting at the front of his mind since the fleet came into visual range. "Why did you wait? If you had rebuilt to this capacity, why not come back sooner?" Hale looked at him steadily. "Because sooner would have been too soon." Tale waited. "The first 10 years, Hale said, we were surviving. The second 10 years, we were building. The last 7 years, we were ready. We used the last 7 years to make sure we were ready in every way that mattered: logistics, crew, reserves, the question of what we were coming back to and what we were going to say when we got here. We did not want to come back in a way that required us to fight. We wanted to come back in a way that made fighting unnecessary." He said it without emphasis, like it was obvious. Tale thought about what kind of discipline that required. 10 years of surviving, 10 years of building, 7 years of waiting, of being ready, and still waiting, of holding 891 ships and more. Then 500,000 people, children born in that unmapped space who had grown up, who were now crew in careful patience until the calculation was right. He asked about the drive architecture he had seen on the newer ships. Hale deferred to someone off-screen. A woman came into frame: chief engineer Mira, introduced by name, 50s, with the specific manner of someone who would rather be working than talking, but could do both if necessary. She explained the drive system in clear language, without classified omissions, apparently unconcerned about sharing the information. The design was entirely human-developed. No external sourcing, because there had been no external sources. They had built it from theory and testing and 27 years of refinement. It was, as far as Tale could tell from the description, more efficient than anything in the Conclave's current fleet inventory. The relay call ended after 40 minutes. Tale sat alone in the relay room for a while before filing his report. He wrote it carefully. He described the ships, the fleet formation, the condition of the crew, the technical information provided. He described Admiral Hale's manner and the clarity of the communication. He described the drive system and noted that independent verification was recommended. Then he reached the summary section, where observers were supposed to give their overall assessment in 1 or 2 sentences, and he sat with his stylus. For a long moment, he wrote, "I am not certain the conclave fully understands what it declared. Extinct 27 years ago. I recommend the relevant records be reviewed before the fleet arrives." He filed the report. 8 days remained. Somewhere behind him, in the endless dark outside the station's hull, 891 ships moved forward in clean formation, patient and unhurried, carrying a people who had been given nothing and had built everything they needed. They did not ask again about docking lane 9. The first request had gone unanswered because the conclave could not agree on whether granting it implied legal recognition. The second request filed on day 11, worded just as politely as the first had gone into a committee. The committee was still meeting when the fleet arrived on day 14. The ships did not wait. They came in at standard approach speed, not aggressive, not slow, not the speed of something unsure of itself. The outer sensor arrays at orbital ring. Veth picked them up 8 hours before visual range and tracked them continuously. By the time the fleet was close enough to see without instruments, the traffic around Veth had gone almost completely still. Cargo haulers held position. Relay couriers cut their drives. A Cerity passenger liner that had been scheduled to depart rescheduled itself without being asked. Everyone just stopped and watched. 891 ships came out of the dark in formation so clean. It looked like a diagram. No gaps, no stragglers, no vessel out of place. The newer ships caught the light of the nearby, starred differently from the older ones. Different hull material, different angles, and the effect, from a distance, was of something that had been built across time but assembled with care. Not patched, not desperate, deliberate. They parked in the space adjacent to docking lane 9, not in it adjacent to it, with a margin that respected the station's traffic infrastructure while making it completely clear that they had chosen this position and were comfortable with it. It was the spatial equivalent of standing outside a door without blocking it. Present, patient, not asking. The conclave's emergency session had been running almost continuously for 6 days by the time the fleet arrived. Brix spent the first hour after arrival making a final argument for treating the fleet's positioning as a hostile act. No one else in the chamber agreed with him. Even the Cerity, who had the most to lose from a full human reinstatement, could see the difference between a fleet that had come to fight and a fleet that had come to talk. High Speaker on approved Admiral Hale's request to address the chamber in person. Brix abstained from the vote. Everyone else voted in favor, which included 3 species that had been uncertain until they saw the fleet hold its position for 6 hours without so much as a tight beam provocation. Yeva was given 15 minutes notice that she was to serve as human civilian liaison for the address. She had no idea what that meant, procedurally. She asked Rail. Rail told her it meant she would stand in the chamber and be present, and if Admiral Hale directed anything to a human representative, she was to respond. That was all. "I am a data analyst," Yeva said, for the second time since this had started. "You have been promoted," Rail said, without apparent humor, and walked away. Yeva stood in the conclave chamber for the first time in her life. It was large, in a way that was clearly designed to make individuals feel small high ceilings. Tiered seating arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, 14 species. Represented in the seats above, light that came from everywhere and therefore cast no comfortable shadows. She stood on the central floor and waited. Hill came in on foot. He had not sent a diplomatic representative. He had not dressed for ceremony. He walked in wearing the working uniform of the Expeditionary Force Dark. Functional, rank designation on the collar with a slight favor of his left leg that suggested an old injury never quite fully repaired. He was alone. No aide, no security, no entourage. Just an old man in a plain uniform who had just parked more than 800 ships outside the station and walked in to say something. He stood on the central floor. He looked up at the tiered seating with the same expression he had worn in the archive footage, not hostile, not intimidated, not performing anything, Just a man with something to say who intended to say it. He did not use notes. I will be brief, he said. I know your time is valuable and there are matters to resolve. I will state what I have come to state and answer questions if there are any. He stated 4 things. The first, the human fleet had survived the rift crossing and expanded its capacity over 27 years. The Conclave's extinction record for humanity was factually incorrect, which was not an accusation but a statement requiring administrative correction. The second, the human civilian population currently living in Conclave administered refugee zones was to be offered a clear and voluntary choice. Remain under Conclave administration if that was their preference, or transfer to human sovereign authority. The fleet had transport capacity for all of them. No one would be compelled. No one would be prevented. The third, the unmapped region beyond the Caldera Rift, which the Conclave had never charted, never claimed, and never administered, had been developed by human labor over 27 years. Under Article 9 of the original Galactic Charter, the discovery and development accords developed unclaimed space held by a registered species was recognized as sovereign territory. Hale noted, calmly, that he expected this point would require some legal discussion, and that the Expeditionary Force's legal team was prepared for that discussion. He said it without smiling. He said it without emphasis. He said it the way you state something that is already true and simply needs to be acknowledged. The fourth, humanity wished to resume its seat on the Galactic Conclave. Not as a junior member, not as a provisional member, as a fleet power, with the full standing that designation carried under the Conclave's own charter. Then he stopped talking. The chamber was silent. Yeva counted. She was not sure why. She just started counting when the silence began, and she reached 11 before anyone moved. It was Rael who moved. She reached forward to her console slowly, deliberately, so that everyone in the tiered seats could see exactly what she was doing, and she entered a command. Then she turned her screen outward, facing the chamber, so that the display was visible to the representatives above. She had opened the amendment form for the Extinction Registry, the form that would change humanity's status in the Conclave's official record from Class 9 extinct military power to something else. The field for the new classification was empty. She had not filled it in yet, but she had opened the form. That was the statement. Anyone who understood Conclave procedure understood what it meant. The process was beginning. Rael was beginning it. The most senior member of the Extinction Registry Bureau was declaring, in the language of administrative action, that the record was wrong and was going to be corrected. Bricks made a sound. It was not quite words. High speaker on looked down from the upper tier at Hale. You said you would answer questions. Yes, Hale said. I have only one. Aunt's voice was slow and considered. In 27 years. On the other side of the rift, did you encounter any hostile forces? Any conflict that the Conclave should be aware of? Hale thought about it for a moment. No. The space beyond the rift is empty. Of known species. We had no external conflicts during the 27 years. Then your fleet is in the condition it arrived in. No combat losses since the rift. Correct. Alm was quiet for a moment. I see, he said. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. What On meant was clear. To everyone in the chamber, a fleet of 891 ships. In full condition, with 27 years of uninterrupted production and development behind it. No combat wear, no resource depletion from conflict. Crewed by people with nothing to prove but a great deal of capacity. That was not a refugee fleet. That was not a remnant. That was the largest single military and industrial force that had presented itself to the Conclave in living memory. Yeva stood on the central floor and did not say anything, because nothing was required of her yet. She looked at the old admiral in the plain uniform, and he, for a moment, looked at her. His expression did not change, but he nodded, once, very slightly, acknowledging her, acknowledging what she represented. The people who had waited, the people in the dome on Dreva 6 at the observation window, the children who had grown up without a flag that was really theirs. She nodded back. On Rail's screen, the amendment form waited for its new classification to be entered. The vote was not unanimous. That was fine. Unanimous would have been suspicious. The conclave was a body of 14 species with 14 sets of interests and 27 years of decisions built on the assumption that humanity was not coming back. Some of those decisions had been convenient. Some had been profitable. A unanimous vote to correct the record would have meant that none of those interests were being protected, and interests like that do not simply disappear because the situation has changed. They have to be argued into the corner, carefully, one by one, until there are not enough votes left to matter. Rail did most of that work. She had been doing it quietly for the 3 days between Hale's address and the formal vote meeting with individual representatives, not in the chamber, where positions hardened into performance, but in smaller rooms where people could say what they actually thought without needing to defend it. The Vaughn were worried about territory. The Cerati were worried about infrastructure costs. 2 of the smaller species were worried about precedent if a fleet that had been declared extinct could simply return and reclaim standing. What did that say about the reliability of extinction declarations in general? Rail answered each concern in the flat, factual language of someone who had spent a long career in the Extinction Registry and understood exactly how the document she had helped process 27 years ago was going to look in the official history. It was going to look wrong, and a body that allowed wrong records to stand because correcting them was inconvenient was not a body that deserved the word conclave in its name. The vote passed 11-2, with Brix's species abstaining. Rail entered the new classification. The form completed. The record changed. Humanity's entry in the Galactic Conclave's official registry shifted in a single administrative action from Class 9 extinct military power to active sovereign state, fleet power, conclave member seat reinstated. 2 pages had ended them. 1 form brought them back. On Driva 6, the news came through the Public Information Network at mid-morning local habitat time. It was not announced dramatically, it appeared as an update in the Conclave's public registry feed, the same feed that usually carried cargo routing changes and trade agreement amendments. Doran saw it on a small wall screen in the data office where he and Yeva both worked, or had worked, before all of this had started. He had returned to Driva 6 the day before to help coordinate what was coming. The fleet had begun sending transit schedules voluntary transfer, as Hale had said. Any human resident in a conclave refugee zone who wanted to join the Expeditionary Force's sovereign territory could register for transport. No pressure, no deadline, just an open offer. The logistics required someone on the ground who knew the administrative systems. Doran knew the administrative systems. He had been filing paperwork in them for a decade. He looked at the registry update on the wall screen for a while. Around him, the office was quiet. Most of the other staff had gone to the dome corridor, the long curved stretch with the observation window where people had been gathering since word first spread. He could hear them from the office, not loudly. People were not shouting. They were talking, and the sound of it was different from the usual sound of the dome. Lighter, somehow. He went to find his mother. She was in the corridor. She was 56 years old and had lived in the dome for 39 of those years, and her hands, when Dorian took them, were shaking slightly, not from distress, just from the effort of holding something large that she had not expected to be allowed to hold. She had been 8 years old when her father deployed. She remembered the goodbye in the specific way you remembered things from childhood, not complete, not perfectly ordered, but the important parts preserved. The feel of the uniform fabric, the smell of the ship dock, the way he had looked at her and said he would come back when the job was done. She stood at the observation window and looked at the fleet visible on the distant sensor feed they were projecting on the corridor screen because the ships were too far for the naked eye but close enough to matter, and she did not say anything for a long time. "Is he on one of those ships?" she asked. "He commands them," Doran said. She squeezed his hands and looked at the screen and did not cry, which he thought was probably because she was doing something harder than crying. She was recalibrating. 39 years of a particular kind of life. A particular set of limits. A particular understanding of what was and was not available to her. All of it shifting, not into joy exactly, but into something more fundamental than joy into the plain fact of being seen. Aboard GNS Ardent, at the moment the registry update confirmed, Nessa relayed the information to the bridge with the same professional composure she applied to all communications, which Hale had noticed she maintained even when things were not professional at all inside her chest. He had known her for 20 years. He knew the difference. He stood at the forward viewport and looked at the stars. Orbital ring Veth was visible ahead, a structure of light, slow turning, full of arguments that had now been resolved. He had been to this viewport many times over the years. In the dark space beyond the rift, during the years when returning had not yet been possible, he had stood here and looked at nothing in particular and thought about what it would take and how long, and whether the people who were waiting had enough patience left. He had not known about Doran then. He had not known that his daughter's son would grow up in a habitat dome doing data work and still be there when the fleet came back. That piece of it he had not planned. Nessa told him the amendment was confirmed. He turned from the viewport. His crew was waiting, the bridge crew of GNS Ardent, men and women who had been born in the unmapped space beyond the rift, who had grown up on these ships, who had trained here and worked here and thought of this fleet as the only home they had ever known. They were waiting to see what he would say. He did not say much. Set course for the refugee zones, he said. Standard approach. Coordinate with the transport teams. Let's bring them home. That was all. The bridge moved. Orders went out across the fleet in the efficient, practiced way of an organization that had been preparing for this exact moment for 7 years. Ships began to reorient in formation, not all of them, not at once. The transit and cargo vessels separating from the main body with the smooth precision of a system that had been drilled. Hale watched it happen from the viewport and felt, not triumph, but the specific satisfaction of a thing done correctly after a very long time. They had gone into the rift with 412 ships and one instruction: do not come back weaker than when you left. They had taken that instruction seriously. The galaxy had looked at the empty dark where the human fleet had been and seen an ending. It had written the ending down. 2 pages, stamped and filed, and stored in an archive where a tired reptilian archivist checked it, occasionally out of professional habit. What the galaxy had not known, what it could not have known from the outside, looking in, was that the humans had not gone into the rift to die. They had gone in because dying was the other option, and they had found the option unacceptable. They had gone in with the same quiet, unremarkable stubbornness with which they did most of the things that looked impossible from a distance and straightforward from up close. They had found empty space. They had built. They had raised children who had never known defeat because there had been no defeat to inherit. They had developed technology in isolation and come out the other side of that isolation with things no one else had, because necessity and time and the human tendency to solve problems, whether or not solving them was considered feasible, had produced, as they reliably did, results. They had waited until they were ready. Not until they were angry, not until they were desperate, not until some external event forced their hand. Until they were ready, and then they had come back. In the conclave registry, the amendment sat in its permanent record. The field that had read extinct now read something else. In the dome on Dreva 6, people stood at the observation window and watched a screen that showed the fleet beginning to move. In the archive room at Orbital Ring Veth, Admiral Drova looked at the updated record on his console for a long time. He had been the one who filed the original form. He supposed, now, that he should feel something complicated about that. Mostly he felt something simpler. He felt like the archive had done its job. A record had been wrong. The record had been corrected. That was what archives were for. 891 ships moved through the dark toward the people who had been waiting without knowing they were waiting. Not loudly, not in the manner of something triumphant, in the manner of something that had set out to do a job and was now completing it, on schedule, as planned, with everything still working. The galaxy had declared them extinct. It had been wrong. And in the quiet, careful, completely unhurried way that humans tended to correct things that were wrong, they had simply gone ahead and proved it.